All right, so let's go ahead and kick this off. We got a lot to do today. I think it's going to take about 35 to 40 minutes. We'll see. So just mentally prepare for that. Either way, if you have to bail right at the half hour, we will send the recording out afterwards. So my name is Jason Barris, Senior VP over here at Infragistics. Been with the company almost 20 years. We got George on the line today, Pablo on the line. George, of course, is our Chief UX Designer, all things product owner manager for App Builder, which you're going to see today, and Pablo, who is an architect on App Builder, so he basically knows everything. So if there's any questions that you have, ask them in the chat. We are here to answer them, and we want to help you understand anything you want to learn today. We're not going to do a ton on App Builder today, mostly about Azure and like configuring Azure and whatnot, but you will still get a good round robin of how everything ties together with App Builder and cloud-based services. So today we'll do a quick overview of what we're going to learn. We'll do the demo, and then we will wrap up. So let's go ahead and get started. I just want to highlight, as we continue to roll out features in the Blazor grid specifically, if you've been using the Angular grid, you're like, man, this thing has every feature possible. I don't need it. Please stop adding features. There's too many features. It does everything I need. Well, Blazor's getting there. We're really close. There's maybe less than a half a dozen things left that we need to wrap up, and we're just releasing those as we get them done after every sprint, every 2-week sprint. So it's pretty exciting to see what we've done with Blazor so far. And if you haven't tried the Blazor grid, please try it. It is amazing. And of course, if you're doing Angular, React, web components, we have grids there too. But today I'm just going to show a little bit of Blazor. So today for the demo, we have 7 steps to success. First, we're going to look at creating a database in SQL Azure. We're going to create an entity framework app in Visual Studio. We're going to deploy this to Azure. We're going to secure credentials with Azure Key Vault. We're going to test this locally and then from the cloud. Then we're going to build an app in App Builder to consume that web API. And then we're going to deploy that application over to Azure. Everything today, or at the end of today's webinar, you should have all the ammo to fully be able to tackle deploying an app to Azure. That's the goal for today's webinar. The applications that I'm going to use, we built in the last 2 webinars. So I'm going to use apps that we've pre-built, like on the web API side, and they're already in GitHub. So these links are public and you can grab them yourself. But the idea is, okay, I did this. Now, what do I do with this? I can do it on-prem. You might know how to do that, but what about Azure? How easy is it? So this is like an overview of what we're going to do. We're going to start with a SQL Server database in a resource group in Azure, and then we are going to take that and build a web API in Visual Studio. We're going to push that over to GitHub, and through GitHub Actions, it's going to deploy over to Azure, but we're going to set up those actions through Azure. So there's this communication between Azure and GitHub that happens when you're building out these applications. And then we're going to use App Builder to build an app and consume all of that stuff. So there's a lot going on, a lot of cool stuff today. The code for this is at GitHub project-manager-web-API. These links will be in the email. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So because we are doing Azure, and if you've ever used Azure, you are at the mercy of the performance of Azure. So I have everything already built, and then we're going to build it another resource group from scratch just to make sure that, you know, if something's taking forever, we can still see what those results should have been. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video as well, just so we don't tie up any additional resources that we don't need to. Let me slide that over there for Zoom. So, all right, so here is Azure. If you're familiar with the way Azure works, you're basically creating resource groups, and in those resource groups, you have like networking and permissions and other things, and then you're deploying applications, databases, whatever. So everything here that is prefixed with PT is what we're going to create today. So we're going to create a database, and this database is going to have a table in it, and that table is going to have data that we're going to consume. We're going to create an Azure Key Vault, which is going to have our credentials, and those credentials are what our API app will use to communicate with the database. So we want to securely pass credentials that are encrypted, and in the service, you're going to use a key vault. And then finally, we're going to create an application that consumes the web API that we built. So in this case, if I go into my web API and I go to my PT API app web test, you can see I get this little error, and that's good. We like that error because I don't have a default page set up, but this actually will be my Swagger, and my Swagger is actually communicating with a database. So there we go. I've just connected via Swagger with this to my database, and then the application, if we go back to our resource group, my web app it's a very simple web application that we built in, or that I built with App Builder. And this is the URL that Azure gives us, Gray Island something or other. And here I've got some data, I've got a bunch of fields, and we can, we're going to work with this. So you're going to create all this. We're going to do all this from scratch today. So I'm going to close out that. I'm going to close out that. I'm going to close out that. And I'm going to start with the database. So actually, no, what I'm going to start with is my resource group. So what I did to prepare is I created a webinar demo resource group. So where is my resource groups? Let's go to resource groups here and make it easy. Webinar demo 2023. So in webinar demo 2023, what I did last night was I actually created the SQL Server. So I actually have SQL Server running in my resource group. And then I created a service plan for applications. These are just like foundational things you need to create. And the way you would create that yourself is you click create, you search for SQL Server, and you just create a SQL Server. They take time to deploy. So that's why I kind of got them ready. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a database inside of my SQL Server. So I'm going to go through the process here in Azure. I'm going to type in SQL Server. Actually, let me type in SQL database here. We'll do a SQL database. You can see you have all these options that pop up. I am going to grab a SQL database, and we'll just click create. And now the next step in through all these wizards is you're just sort of doing a lot of configuration. So that's a lot of what we're doing today. The first thing I want to do is add this to my resource group. My database name is going to be Project Tracker. My server is the server that I already had set up in my webinar demo 2023 resource group, which was Milo Barris. That's my cat. My workload is going to be development, not production. Everything I'm doing here is free. So everyone in the world has $150 or $200 of free credits for Azure. So you guys can do all of this for free. There's no cost or anything like that. I'm using my free credits from Azure. So there's nothing here that costs any money. So let me see, development, blah, 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 webinar demo. Okay, all that looks good. We'll go to next, networking. So by default, this is set to yes. I do need Azure services to connect to this database because my application is going to connect to it. So that is good. I'm going to add the current client IP address to the firewall rules, and everything else can remain the same. I do not want to enable Defender, nothing like that. Great. I don't need a backup, nothing like that. Tags and review and create, and we are done. So let's go ahead and hit create. So now this is going to create the SQL database. Now, once the database is created, we need to add data to it. So in GitHub, we have the project manager API repo, and the one that I mentioned earlier had dashes in it. So if you go back, I'll go to Jay Barris and I go to my repositories, you've got project manager web API. This guy here is what we created a couple webinars ago. And like, there's all kinds of information. That was the link that was in the slide. So you can watch the video. There's an app and all this other good stuff. I copied it, and I'm just doing a slightly different one for today, Project Manager Web API. But in this repo, we have the database script. So this is the script for my projects and all this other stuff. Now, You can get your database into Azure in any way that you can imagine. You could be in SQL Server Manager on your client, and then you can export to Azure. You can generate scripts. You can generate scripts and data. I just generated scripts and data from my SQL Server, and I put it up here in GitHub. So let's go back here. The resource is still deploying. So let's give this a second to deploy. Now there's the order of operations here that I am going to do is create the database. Then I'm going to create the key vault. Then we're going to go ahead and create our web API. We're going to test that web API, and then we're going to associate the key vault. We're going to deploy the web API. Then we'll associate the key vault and the web API, and then we'll finish up with our app builder app. So now that this is created, I'm going to go to the resource, and this is my database. Now in SQL Azure, you've got this query editor preview. And when we went through the wizard, I said, let me do the SQL authentication and my principal. So my principal is JSON B for this Azure instance. And now with this, I have a nice query editor. It's very basic. There's not much to it, but it will allow me to run scripts, and scripts for SQL is pretty much all that matters. So we click run, and you can see all my stuff worked well. If I go into tables and I go into views and I go into stored procedures, everything is here. If I go to my tasks, I'll select the top 1,000 rows, and I have my 3 tasks here. Now, keep in mind, when I showed you the running app with 4 tasks, that's because that's another database running in that other resource group. We're doing all of this from scratch today. All right, so now I've got my database. Things are good. I have a database, I have a table or tables that I want to consume. So let's go ahead and go back to our resource group. That's okay, we don't need to save that. Let's go to our resource groups, and let's go to our webinar demo, and let's go ahead and click create, and I'm going to type in key vault. So let's add our Azure key vault, and we will show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and hit create. The key vault is the way that you go back and forth between your applications and anything that needs something secret, and that's how we're going to authenticate through our connection string. You could have other things in your key vault, it doesn't matter, but we're going to call this project tracker key vault 2023. Oh, I need to maybe get rid of that. There we go. I'm trying to keep it unique. So project tracker key vault 2024. We'll leave that. Region US pricing tier standard. This is key. It's in my webinar demo 2023 resource group. Days to retain. I'm going to put 7 here because I don't need these things to hang around. I'm going to delete all this when we're done today. And that's it. I'm going to click create. So now my key vault will be created. This should go relatively quick. Key vault's just a quick template on Azure. But what we're going to do is the minute that it's ready, we're going to add a secret to the key vault. So we created a key vault called Project Tracker Vault 2024. And now we're going to add a secret into that key vault. The secret is going to be my connection string. So I'm going to prepare that here, copy that. So let's go to our resource. And this is your key vault. You have some options here on the left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select secrets, and then I'm going to generate a secret. So let's click the generate button, and we're going to call this project tracker secret 2024 to keep things consistent. It tried to autocomplete there for me. Let's go ahead and paste in my connection string. The connection string I just copied from my other screen. So that's no magic here. I just copied and pasted it from my other screen. We will leave the defaults and we will click create. Now there's an important thing that happens here with this key vault is the access configuration. So in order for my web API to use this key vault or the secret in the key, we need to tell it that the application is allowed to do that. We're going to set that up when we deploy our web API. But if we go to overview, there's a couple important things here. So this URL I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it because we're going to need it for our web API in a minute. I'm going to put this over in my notepad, and then my secret, I'm going to go ahead and select that. And I'm going to copy this too, because we're going to need this as well. So both of those items are what we need in our web API, our .NET Core web API, to look up the credentials to connect to SQL Server. So let's go back to our resource groups. We'll go to webinar 2023. So far we've got our project tracker, Key Vault, and we've got our database. So step 3, we need to go ahead and test our database with our web API. The web API is already created and built, so we don't have to go through and write all this code. So I am just going to click here in GitHub and say open in Visual Studio. So I'm going to open this guy in Visual Studio. And because I've done this a few times, I don't want to have any conflict in my local folder. So I'm going to put a different path here, and I'm going to clone this repository locally. So now I've got my project manager web API. This should look awfully similar because we just did it in the last webinar. If you remembered the last webinar, we talked about the .NET 7 features, and one of them was typed results, which typed results means we don't have to do anything fancy to get that OK 200 with my schema back in Swagger. So this is a .NET 7 application. Or it's a .NET 7 web API, and we've got a handful of things here. What I did, because in the last webinar, we had like a bunch of stuff. So I have this thing called Program-Advanced, which has all of the API calls. For today, to keep it simple, I think I have 3 or 4 or 5. I'm just doing a get, put, post, delete, nothing fancy. So now, what I want to do is make sure that my database is accessible. And we already deployed the database. And in this application, because it was already deployed and tested, I'm already using some of my Azure Key Vault stuff. So if you remember, we had the URL and we had the secret. So the secret for what I was testing was a little bit different than this. So I'm going to copy the secret that we just added, and I'm going to paste that. So that was called Project Tracker Secret 2024. And then the URL. So you'll see here that I need to get my endpoint by going to my configuration. If I go to my app settings, my endpoint was Project Tracker 2020 something vault.azure, but today it's going to be 2024. So we're just going to change this. So how does your application know how to get its connection strings? It does it by going to this URL. Once it hits the Key Vault, it says, hey, is this application even allowed to look into this Key Vault? Oh, yes, it is. It's an Azure principal. We haven't done that yet, but I'm kind of explaining this. And then once it's there, it says, well, give me that connection string. Sure. It's in Project Tracker Secret 2024. And that's what we use to connect to SQL Server. So that is all you need to do to associate the Key Vault with your application. There's 2 important things that you're adding. So if I go to my dependencies, you'll see that I've got Azure Identity and Azure Key Vault Secrets. So here I'm using Azure Identity and Azure Key Vault Secrets, and then you use these 4 lines of code, and that's all you need to do. But this only works for applications deployed to Azure. So I'm going to comment this out. And what I'm going to do is uncomment just testing that our database works. So here I've got configuration, get connection string, Azure connection. Well, you'll notice in my app settings, I don't have connection strings. Of course I don't, because when you deploy to Azure, you don't want to have these things in, or deploy to GitHub, you don't want to have these things in plain text. I mean, people will steal your stuff. So they are in my user secrets. So, whoops, they are in my user secrets. Manage user secrets. So here I've got Azure connection. This is going to jbarris.windows.net. Remember, our database is called milobarris.database.windows.net. Our initial catalog is not PT test. That was in the demo in our SQL Server resource group. Our initial catalog is called Project Tracker. That's the database that we created. So now I save this, I hit run, and it's going to use this Azure connection. And basically we should see the same thing that we just saw on my SQL Server resource group. This is going to go and get those 3 items that we have in the cloud. So far what we've done is we've created the database, created the key vault. We've tested that the database actually functions from a .NET Core web API, and now we can deploy this off to Azure. So first to GitHub, then Azure. So the first thing I did here was I did update my vault, and I did update my program.cs here. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment here. I am going to comment these. And so now we're going to use Project Tracker Secret 2024 and our correct key vault. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to my Git changes. I'm going to put a note here, updated URI, and I am going to commit all. So this was created locally. Let me go ahead and push and pull here, and then this will get synchronized with GitHub. So now if we go back, now we're done here. We can close Visual Studio. We go back here. If I look and I do a refresh, it should say updated now, program CS. We've got our Azure Key Vault that's commented out, and we are good to go. So what's the next step? Now let's deploy this to Azure. So let's go back to Azure, and we're going to click create. And what are we going to create? We're going to create an API app. So let's go ahead and search for API app. I'm going to select API app, click create. And this is where all this beautiful magic happens. So I'm going to give the app name here. We'll call it Project Tracker 2023 API app, like that. And my runtime stack is .NET 7. It's kind of important. My region is US East. That's fine. My Windows plan is not the auto API resource plan. It's my webinar demo service plan. So that's the Windows server it's going to run on. Could have done Linux. It doesn't really matter, but I did Windows when I set it up. Now for deployment, this is it. Continuous actions. I want to enable continuous delivery with this. So every time a change is made, it's going to auto deploy. So I'm going to select my JBarris org in GitHub. I am going to select my project manager web API project, which is that guy there. And I'm going to use the master branch, and we'll go next to networking, enable public access on. Yes. Next. Application insights. No, I don't need that. Next. No tags. Everything looks good. We will go ahead and click create. So now this takes a minute or two to actually deploy. So let's go over to our chat, and we will take a look at some questions here. Pedro, can the secret name also be in the config file to avoid hard coding a specific DB? If you mean a config file in Azure, I'm sure it can. The whole point of oh, you're saying just the secret name. Yeah, I don't see why not. All you're doing is passing that string. So that string can be anywhere. So the answer to that's definitely. Yep, the recording will be shared later. And it looks like George has handled the other questions. Let's see. Copy paste. Okay, yeah, George is handling all of the Excel questions. All right, so deployment still in progress. So what's going to happen is it's going to tell us it's done, but it's really not done. So once the application is sort of created, like right now, we'll click go to resource. I have my web app created, but in GitHub, we go to GitHub Actions. This is still running. This is going to take a little bit to run. So, but we have to do a couple things on our application. And this is critical, because if you don't do this step, you're going to be scratching your head for hours and days and weeks on why can't I get my application to work with my database in Azure. So the first thing you need to do in your API app is go to identity. So when you click identity, the system assigned identity is off by default. I'm going to click on, and I'm going to click save. So what this is going to do is it's going to register my application with Active Directory. So now I'm registered with Active Directory, which means now my application is actually a user in Active Directory. If I looked at my Outlook address book and it was synced with Active Directory, I would see Project Tracker 2023 API app. I mean, this thing could have any API, can do whatever it wants. So it's actually pretty cool. So now this application needs to be associated with my Azure Key Vault. So let's go back to our resource groups. We'll go back to Webinar Demo 2023. You can see there's our API thingy. Let's go to our Project Tracker Vault 2023. Let's go to Access Configuration. So if you remember in the default, I said, yeah, just go ahead and do Access Vault. At that point in the wizard, I could have said when I created the Key Vault, yeah, use this app, but the app didn't exist yet. Now the app exists, and now it's enabled as a system object that Azure knows about. So I can go to Access Policies, I can create a new one, and what this needs is the ability to get and list the keys or the secrets in my Key Vault. So I've got secret permissions. I want to get them and list them. I click Next. Now, what principal is allowed to do that? So let's do a quick search for project, and it must be my Project Tracker 2023 API app. So now I'm kind of tying everything together. There's a link happening here. Let me click Next, click Create. And now my Key Vault and my API app are joined at the hip. And you can see that this guy is still building out. This might take another minute. So in the meantime, let's go over to App Builder and start building the application. And as soon as this is ready, we'll use the URL, the Swagger URL for it, and add our data source in our App Builder app. So I'm going to click over to App Builder. I had this movie app open because it is beautiful. I mean, this thing, I just love this movie app. So I'm going to take this app and I'm going to change out movies, and I'm going to use it for dashboards and reports and stuff. And it's just like the colors, everything is awesome. We have a lot of new, really awesome apps that we've added. So we've got the Health Vault, the CRM, the Learning Portal, Inventory Management, movie app, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to use a template though today, header nav, use template. And I'm here in App Builder. In view 1, I'm going to get rid of this text. I'm going to change this and say project list. Actually, it's not projects, it's tasks, right? Tasks list. I'm going to do Control E. I'm going to add a grid. There's my grid. Now, normally in every demo I've done, I always go over here to data and I'm going to grab some data. I'm going to wait until I can use our Azure App Service, which is deployed. So let's go back here to our Webinar Demo 2023. Let's go to our API app. What URL do we have? Project Tracker 2023 API app, Azure, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully we get that error screen, because remember when I showed the demo from our SQL Server resource group, we had the error screen. So this should give us an error screen. It's kind of heating up here, starting up for the first time. This is always exciting. Good. This is exactly what we want to see. All right. Now let's just type in /Swagger. And boom, we are in Swagger. And here's our database. Try it out. Execute. We should see our 3 records here. This means that the communication between our Key Vault and our database and our application is correct. So everything here worked. The first time you do this, you'll probably have an error. Why did you get an error? Well, there's 2 reasons you would get an error here where they wouldn't communicate. 1, you didn't set the principal of this app to the Key Vault. So you need to do that. Number 2, you either misspelled or didn't update the URI for your Vault key or the name of the secret in your Web API app. Those are the only reasons this wouldn't work. Or I mean, because if you tested it locally, it should work remotely. So that's what I'm saying. The misspelling could be it. So here, if we do a post, we can try this out, and we'll do task name 4, or we'll do 5. I think it's 4. Well, we'll see. Project ID 1, priority 2. And today, is Damian's birthday. And Damian deserves a lot of birthday praise because he is responsible for all of the good stuff that happens in code generation and app builder. So if you see Damian out tonight at the restaurants or bars, give him a happy birthday. All right, so what matters here is this URL, of course. Let's go back to app builder. Let's go ahead and add our data source plus REST API. We're going to call this project tracker just to keep consistent. I'm going to add my open API URL. You've seen this 1,000 times in our demos. That's there. Let's configure our endpoints. I'm going to select all these guys. Ignore the red arrows because we're not actually going to test these here, but let's select data and we are done. Now I want to associate that new data with my grid. So there's project tracker. I want to bind projects to it. Look at, there's Damian. Happy birthday, Damian, the one we just added. We want to add events for actions for row added, edited, and deleted. So row added, we're going to do a post. Row edited, we're going to do a put. And row deleted, we're going to do a delete. So those are the events associated with it. So if we click run, you can see here's our app. And I'm going to edit this guy and we'll do an exclamation point here. And we're going to change this to task name 4 and hit enter. The nice thing is App Builder will let me do live editing in App Builder if I want. So I'm going to turn on live editing and this actually saved to the database. I want to go ahead and change the couple more things here. So let's go to our master view. Instead of app name, let's call this project and task tracker like so. And I want to change this to projects or tasks. And I'm going to change the theme to something special for Damian's birthday. I know he loves orange. And so let's go ahead and do that. So now our app is looking good. So of course, what are we going to do next? We're going to change the name. It's going to be called Project Tracker Webinar 2023. And let's go ahead and download the zip. And let's go ahead and open up here. I'm going to extract all. And I'm going to grab my project here, my actual application. I'm going to ignore the tests and all that. And I need to move this over to my C drive, Dev Blazor. And you're probably wondering why. Well, I've gone full-time Mac, as you can see by my demo using Windows. And the Mac has all those backslashes and stuff, and it just doesn't work well with Visual Studio. So we're just going to open this guy up. And the great thing is we don't need to do anything right? App Builder generated the code. I'm already using a web API in the cloud in Azure. This is an Azure API. And here we've got our application. So this is all great. Of course, it always works on your machine. What can we do now? We are going to deploy this to Azure. So let's go over here. I'm going to create a Git repository. My Git repository, Project Tracker Webinar 2023 is fine with me. We'll save our solution and we will let this do its thing. Now we're done. So I'm going to close this out. Now we're done with Visual Studio here. We'll close this out, close this out. We'll go back to GitHub. We're going to go make sure this is here. So we'll go to my repos. And here I've got my webinar 2023. Everything looks great. I don't have to do anything more here. What we got to do is go back to our webinar 2023 resource group and now add our application. So what are we going to add? We're going to add a static web app. So let's do a static web app. Click static web app, click create. And we're going to call this static, or we'll call it project tracker. Oops. Blazor client 2023. All right. And free. Yes, free is good. We're going to use GitHub for continuous delivery. It's the JBarris org. Let's go ahead and pick something here that looks right. I think it was called Project Tracker Webinar 2023. This is the name of the app that we just created. And I'm going to post this off the master branch. The build presets are Blazor, right? If we did Angular, we would have said Angular. Now, this is really important. Here, the app location is /, it's not client, and the API location, I just delete it. If you don't change this, your deploy is going to fail. And so I think like when Blazor first released, it automatically created folders called client and API or something. I'm not sure, but they default to that. But these are things too. If you're using static API, static functions in Azure, that's where they would go in your API thing. So let's go next. This looks right. We'll do next, next, and we will do create once this pops up. And again, this is going to do the same exact thing we did with our web API app. We are going to create the resource in our resource group. Through this exercise, Azure is injecting into my GitHub repo the file, which will kick off the Azure action or the GitHub actions, which will then build and do all this stuff and then deploy this. So now if I go to resource, there's a couple things here, my fake URL, Ashley Rock 2023. So whenever I gave these things a name during the deployments, like I gave them these weird names, webinar 20, like the names that you give things don't matter. The only thing that matters is the URL here, and that's not going to be the name of your project. You can add hosting plans and custom domains and all that other stuff for your application right through Azure, but by default, it's just going to give you something generic that it made up on the fly. So now if we go back over to my project tracker webinar and we go to GitHub Actions, you can see there's two things going here. Now, I'm not an expert at this stuff, even though I play an expert on TV. I don't know why it kicked off two of these. There's something that is happening with Azure telling it to run this twice. I'm not sure why, because they're basically the same. One of these is going to fail, one's going to succeed. That's been, at least that's been what's happening before. So this build and deploy is what takes a while, maybe 3 to 4 minutes. And then all these other things are what's happening in these actions. And we'll look at that when it's done and you can see all the stuff that it does. And if we go over to the code, this is what it injected. It injected this workflow. And this is the Azure action that's actually running. And you can see here, these are some of those questions that I answered, like app location / API, output location, etc. So that is what it added to this project. Now, what's going to happen is this application that I had open in Visual Studio and I deployed, every time I change this app, it's going to run this action and it will auto deploy to Azure. So you don't have to ever go back to Azure. If you're checking into master, you don't ever have to go back and do anything. It kind of does it automatically. And of course, for demo purposes, this is just how I'm doing it. It makes it very easy. We'll go over here. You can see this one failed. I expected it to fail. And what I thought we would do now is I was going to ask George to do a demo of Figma, because this could actually take about 2 more minutes, maybe 3. George, do you want to take over the screen share and show Figma real quick while this thing just continues to deploy?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, let me stop my share. And so George, basically we updated, we're constantly updating. And so we updated the way that Figma works with Figma's auto layout feature. So I just asked George to do a little time filler here for a couple minutes because that deployment takes a while. So George, take it away.
Excellent. So Jason showed you how design was done inside of App Builder, but sometimes we work with designers who like to work in design tools, and Figma is really, really popular right now. And for that, we have our Indigo.design UI kit, because everything we do as a platform is that we follow a design systems approach. What that means is that when you are working in Figma, we actually provide you a UI kit, which contains all the basic building blocks for building apps in a design tool. And for customers who are interested in it, they can always get it from our cloud itself. So if I go to cloud.indigo.design, and I go to getting started and I say get Indigo design system. You'll see that we support multiple design tools, but for Figma people, you just get the UI kit, you get the plugin for the Figma, which allows us to talk with Figma. And then we have sample files, which is what I'm showing you right now. Open here. And this is a design which was created with the basic building blocks we are providing in the UI kit. And as you can see, this is very similar to a team collaboration sample you see inside of App Builder. But the beauty is handoff has been always a challenge. So designers who are creating this stuff, they send specifications to development teams, but they are actually re-implementing all of this stuff, right? Because the designer has already spent the time creating this content, creating the layouts. And what we have done now is made it one-click process where once you have created these designs and layouts have been done using this new auto layout feature in Figma, in order for us to send this to development, all we have to do is open up the plugin. I have the plugin installed here, Indigo Design Figma plugin. I say create a new app, and I'm gonna just pump it into a workspace which is in the cloud, and I say create an app. And that's all I've done. The design was done. It's now taking care of parsing this design. And what we are doing is we are looking at all these layouts created in Figma, and we are turning over to web layouts, like Flexbox layouts. And then if we find any image assets, icons, things like that, which the designer has added to the actual artboard, we will take care of that. So now all you receive is this URL. If I click on this URL, it'll fire up my browser, and you're seeing the app builder preview. And you can see it looks exactly like the app. And the beauty of it is if I click edit, now I have an editable version of that app. And all the components are the same components which allow you to actually edit it as if you had dragged and dropped these components onto the artboard, right? So there were two artboards in it. Both of them get parsed. And that was a card component. Well, guess what? Here I have a card component. Here I have a calendar, and when it comes inside of App Builder, it's also a calendar, right? For a more simpler example, if I show you another design here, and I'm showing it to you from illustration purposes. So here is like a very simple web page layout. And the only difference is that I have added a lot of visual assets, which are SVG kind of assets. And all I told in Figma is that when you actually export it as an SVG. And that's what I've done for all of these visual assets here. Again, this one is also using auto layout, which is just Figma's way of calling Flexbox. And if I do the same process again, I say create a new app. This one should go a little faster. I go to demo, same workspace. I say create an app. And within like 5 seconds, it should give me a URL, which allows me to edit the app. There you go. Maybe less than 5 seconds. And the real point I wanted to make when pulling this out here is that now you can see the layouts are exactly the same, similar edit experience. You can see the entire page here. So if you look at the design, this is the design, and this is the actual app. So you're getting pixel perfect transformation from a design tool into an editable app builder project. And the real kicker is all the visual assets I actually marked for export, they also get parsed and added into your workspace library. So now you can use these visual assets throughout your app. And this is another way in which visual assets could be handed over to development, in addition to skipping this whole relaying out all this UI. So you can see the padding information, the Flexbox setting, all of that stuff is automatically set for me. So I have used up my filler section. Jason, has your deployment finished?
George, that was amazing. It's perfect timing. Thank you so much. Actually, super amazing work we're doing with the code generation and the layouts from our design kit. So this stuff is just pretty mind-boggling. Yes, the deployment did finish, and I did get some information. Mark mentioned the build is happening for master branch, and then the other branch. I think if I delete it, or I don't know, he said to disable it, but next time. But yeah, you can see here, this guy actually finished. All of the good stuff happened. And if you open this up, you can see all the things that it's sort of going through, installing, doing to compile your deployment, and then, or compile your application, and then actually deploying it up to the cloud and then doing the post work. So if we go back to our webinar demo 2023 resource group, we will see Project Tracker Blazor Client 2023, Ashley Rock. All you got to do is click the URL for this guy, and you can see here we have our app deployed. So we have a live app built with App Builder running in Azure, connecting to a web API that we deployed to Azure using Azure Key Vault to authenticate and encrypt our connection strings between applications and everywhere else. So here, if I just go ahead and click plus, we can say task name 5, and we'll leave, whoops, let's go ahead and spell it right. We'll leave, wait a minute, I gotta hit delete. We'll leave our date added and date updated empty because I know those will get auto-populated. Let me add a new date. Project ID will be 1. We're going to assign this one to George again. And the priority here will be 1, of course, and click done. And now that's updated. We can delete task number 1, hit refresh, and we'll see, yep, this is all happening in real time. It's all live. And you have just finished understanding everything you need to know about doing an Azure deployment. So I am going to wrap this up now. I want to ask JJ to kick off the poll that we ask at every webinar. It's always important. It helps us figure out what to build and where to spend time and all this other stuff. But hopefully today you got a good view of what it looks like to build applications locally, deploy them to GitHub, and then use the power of Azure to then deploy those out to your millions and millions of users, which is very, very exciting. So what I would like you to do is try App Builder today, along with our Blazor product or Angular product. It doesn't matter. Here's a few URLs. We have a playlist here, which goes to the web for what's happening in like how-tos. So basically how-to video playlists. If you haven't signed up for Discord, you should sign up for Discord. It was mentioned already in the chat today. Discord is where you can talk to the product team. So like Pablo is answering questions here, but Pablo's on Discord as well. So you can get him anytime you want. Also, George, Constantine, the whole team. You see all these names. You're probably familiar with them, but Discord is the way to get help. And yeah, if you can answer the poll questions, we really appreciate it. It looks like a lot of people haven't tried App Builder yet. So we really want you to try out App Builder. It is very easy to do WYSIWYG screen design and app design, connect to data. One of the cool features that George is wrapping up now from a design perspective, and then we're going to get into development as our master detail, which will ship in the next couple months. And, our sprints are 2 weeks. So we try to release stuff after those sprints are done if things are ready. So you're constantly seeing updates. So if you're a Blazor developer, you've been looking for the combo box in App Builder. Well, it's there now. You've been looking for the dialogue. Well, it's there now. Those were just released. The other thing we have coming is the 23.1 release, which will be in the middle of May. That release will include more new features, and we're also doing a bunch of work on the charts. So it'll be an interesting release in terms of data visualization. I can't wait to show you some of the new capabilities and features we are adding there. And just from the poll questions, so to share a little information, it looks like only about 40% of folks are building Blazor apps. Most folks are using SQL Server or Azure SQL, and then rest is in second place. 50%, but 88% of you are using a SQL Server or Azure SQL. Most of you are developers. For the 20% or no, for the 3% that are designers, thank you, George, for speaking their language. If you're a developer, do you work with a design team? 70%, no, that's pretty consistent. And then for the design tools that people do use, it looks like none is number 1, and then Figma is number 2. And I'm surprised PowerPoint and Paint, they are down there at only 3%. And then, of course, HTML, CSS, the answers that you would expect are what everyone is answering here. Primary development platform, Angular, Blazor, and Windows Forms. And then what percentage of low code are you doing today? 10% of you are around 27%. So about a third of you use low code tools 10% of the time, which is pretty interesting. majority of people don't use tools. And yeah, you know, Pedro, we'll add Visio next time. There's a question from Gene. Can we use Visual Studio to publish our client app to Azure without there are wizards in Visual Studio that let you do that, but you still need to create resource groups and other things beforehand. So in Visual Studio, if you right click on your project and do a deploy, you can follow some wizard there to do it. However, most of the time you're working with a source control system. So either Azure DevOps or GitHub or some Git sort of thing. And so you're really just deploying to that, right? So you're just, and then you don't have to worry about it, right? You deploy to GitHub and, you know, and in the next 10 minutes, your app is live, or it's in a branch. And then when you have a release process, maybe after every sprint or after every month, then your app is live once you push it to master. So, you know, that's kind of why I showed that way, because I'm assuming most people are doing that. Next webinar, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. Blazor 101, pages, parameters, and sharing data. What this is just a back to basics Blazor webinar on how to do like routing, how to share context between pages, how to pass parameters, all these other things. The cool thing is when I talk about master detail and app builder, all of this just kind of magically gets included, but we don't have that yet. So I'm going to show you how to do it from scratch. We're going to start an app in app builder. Then we're going to go ahead and augment it with a bunch of these features here. So that's May 4th. And so with that, I want to thank everyone. I really appreciate your time today. I know everyone's busy. This webinar went a little bit longer, but I think there was a lot of good information here. I want to thank Pablo, George, Jesse, JJ, everyone that made this app possible, and especially the product team. And like I said, it is Damian's birthday today. So if you do see him out and about, wish him happy birthday. Thanks again, everyone, and we will see you on May 4th.